Hello, and welcome to another episode of Presence Practice with Poonam and Parker. Hey, Poonam.
Hey, Parker.
The topic today is spiritual bypassing, or as Eckhart would call it, avoidance. So it's sort of a lateral ego move that we see as we begin to awaken, and there's some symptoms of it are stagnation, where we feel stagnant, we seek out yet another teacher or teachings, a lack of responsibility when we are in a conflict, because the universe will keep offering us the same situations over and over again, as we discussed or that Poonam so eloquently described in the karma video, which we'll link below, by the way. So when we feel uncomfortable, do we reach for a spiritual text or a talk? Do we go and find something fun to do? Do we engage in addictive behavior to avoid the discomfort of what's coming to us in the present moment? And spiritual bypassing would just immediately skip to a transcendent thought. So we're here on the horizontal relative reality, and then we've got the vertical dimension, the absolute. And we'll just skip up here and not experience what the very teaching is, ironically, which is to stay in our body and seeing what's there, accepting and loving what is. So, and that's where liberation occurs. This is how the light of consciousness burns up this reactivity. So we're not, because we've experienced a complete break in suffering, as I'm sure all of you certainly have, a break in suffering, and you've experienced peace, that beautiful peace that enhances the experiences of joy and stillness, the experience of just this radical stillness that sits underneath all of these experiences. And when we put our focus on it, it's like turning up the dimmer switch. So Eckhart wrote an article, so I'm going to read that article, and hopefully we'll put it in the video as well. So I'm going to read it to you here. Awareness or presence is never avoidance. In awareness, you allow yourself to feel whatever it is that you feel. You do not repress it in any way. Do you sense unresolved pain within? How are you going to resolve the pain except by allowing yourself to feel it? I believe it was Carl Jung who said, the fundamental problems are never solved, but they are outgrown, which means that you reach a different level of consciousness, and the problem is no longer that important. You grow out of it. Many problems cannot really be solved. Psychoanalysis tries to solve all the unresolved issues in your life, but you can go on and on with that, because the more you delve into it, the more things you'll discover. And at some point, you have to step into another state of consciousness that is simple awareness. And then those things are transcended. You don't suppress, they're no longer that important. And some things will subside and resolve. Whatever it is you need to understand about your unresolved issues will come into the light of awareness when you allow yourself to feel what you feel. So deep acceptance, like deeply accepting of everything moment by moment. If it's in allowing ourselves to be where we're at, there might be a harsh voice that when we experience grief, grief is no good, you've got karma. Just allow the grief to be there without the story, and we can open the space. Let me finish his article here. And some things will subside and dissolve. Whatever it is you need to understand about your unresolved issues will come into the light of awareness when you allow yourself to feel what you feel. You may occasionally get an insight into something that happened in the past or that caused the pain. The important thing is that you don't perpetuate or add to the muddle of painful feelings within through mind identification and further thinking so that your emotions begin to use your mind. And that's an important distinction that you'll discover and that we discover in the present moment is that if we're not present or we're escaping the feeling, we're going to bury it and then go have another similar experience later on until we're ready. And that's not wrong or out of line either. If it takes many times, that's okay too. But so if we sit there and we feel it, if we move with a story, then the emotions will start to dictate the next thought that we have, the next thought, and we still haven't broken that karmic cycle, that conditioned pattern of behavior. So I think that's a really beautiful point Eckhart's making. You can't achieve absolute perfection on the level of form. There will always be certain limitations here and there, things that have been around and lived inside you perhaps since childhood. They may continue. So it's only really through transcendence that you go beyond whatever is there that is unresolved, but still carried around within you. If you don't add to the pain within, then it gradually subsides and dissolves in the light of presence. So that's one way, the pain. Other ways are just getting caught up in one teacher after another, just seeking outside of us for something that we already know, for someone to come and some teacher to come and help dissolve some of it with us. And there's a place for that. And the other side is that it can turn into something worth picking apart and chewing on. The mind starts chewing on it because it's interesting or tasty. It likes the little flickers of awareness that the teaching lets in, similar to other meditations. But it comes a time when we bring something out of the concept and accept the simplicity of it and the stillness and the peace that's always there that these teachers are pointing at again and again and again become reality. And then we're able to just sit still with whatever is. So if we find ourselves in conflict and not being aware of our role in the conflict and what that brings up for us, if we're always seeking out something outside of ourselves to blot out the pain that can be in existence, then we're avoiding. And spiritual bypassing is one of those where we just use the transcendental tools to just not experience the present moment, sort of using what I've seen people do sometimes is use verses in the Bible or other religious literature to not have to sit with the realness of the present moment, and how beautiful it is that there's such a big embrace of the absolute. But let us be here doing what all the plants and trees and the earth is doing, which is to grow and evolve. And that is what is. And so solidarity on the path, and may we say yes with a loving curiosity to whatever is, and not just what is joyful and blissful and seems like it's nice, or how it looks like we should be, or identify as a spiritual being, and so no longer have to deal with the worldly chaos or we hold both, that there is order and chaos, and it's also within us. And let's be kind, or let's allow the kindness within us to emerge and flow on every being we come in contact with whenever we can.
I have a few words, Parker, on spiritual bypass. I kind of think that it more is it something that if I was spiritual, if I thought I had the concept that I was spiritual, the spiritual bypass is when some kind of challenge comes, right, in the form of a loss, that I say, oh, I'm too spiritual, I shouldn't be experiencing any grief. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
That I
so
shouldn't feel the feeling.
we hold both. That we hold the truth of the grief or the loss or whatever the feeling is. We hold that along with the absolute. We can hold both at the same time. That's a maturing awakened being, is to be able to hold the grief as what is, but don't hold it with the story, which leads to more emotion and suffering. We hold that grief and allow our simple presence to be with that grief, and not ask it to go away, not try to escape it in any way, not say, I've already done the grief for 2 days now, I'm ready to move on, I have things to do. There's lots of ways that we will stuff that, and that's okay if that's the direction you're going in. If you have some awareness, you may make a different take a different direction. But if you can see it when it's happening, then we break that cycle. Because it's not I see people in the spiritual community that are in a state of suffering all the time, completely caught up with oftentimes a concept that, when the answer is so simple, the answer is to sit with it, and perhaps a message comes up, and we sit with it as if it will never change. That this is that we don't say, I wish it was different, that because that's resistance. We sit with what is and allow it to be there. We don't decide that now we're not spiritual enough, or that we're broken or imperfect. These are just voices that are the critic choir coming in to have something to say. And then we embody whatever comes out of that is what is. It's coming from that place of deeply seeing and accepting things as they are.
So,
Drop it. The story, drop the story. Yeah.
Well, what I see is if I thought that I was very spiritual and I shouldn't be experiencing this grief, what happens is, in that mental concept of who I think I am not experiencing my grief properly, and that will convert into the pain body. That'll get stuck as, because that's one main point I've learned from this Nature of Personal Reality by Jane Roberts, that negative energy has a frequency, an electromagnetic frequency. Every thought has a inner sound, invisible light, and an electromagnetic frequency is what he says. And then negative thoughts have a way of, it's almost like how a magnet gets metal attached. Each negative thought attaches to another negative thought. And when I heard this on the audiobook of Nature of Personal Reality, I realized that's what Eckhart is talking about, is the pain body. Because those are all our negative thoughts of all the past that we have stored in our body. So if we don't deal with the grief in this present moment, and we do the spiritual bypass and say, I'm not going to, I'm too spiritual, I cannot experience, I'm not supposed to be experiencing any loss, any grief, right? If I say that, then I am actually adding on to my pain body. And one day I'm going to explode because that pain body, more negative. One day this entity, this form will explode because that's what pain body does. So uh, what I heard when you were reading Eckhart's excerpt, what he normally recommends is do your presence practice, build your presence power during normal days, so that when the grief comes, you know what awareness is. So most people are thinking that when we say we can, when you are saying, right, give your grief spaciousness, give it awareness. People think we're doing it through the mind. No, we brought the transcendent dimension. We are totally resting in stillness and experiencing the heaving feeling of grief. We are experiencing that heaviness completely and fully,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because I remember my son, for 2 years, he lived in Connecticut, and I could see that I would think this thought because I had developed some presence power by then, that I'm thinking this thought, oh, I miss him so much. He's left me and I may not ever see him again. And then tears are welling up. And then I gave all the space to the tears. My mom passed away in 2016, the same thing. Like I would think I'm never going to hold her again. I'm never going to feel her hands on my body again. I'm never going to experience her cooking again. She was an
Yeah.
awesome cook. And
Mhm.
every time each thought, and then you give it space. But all this, when we are saying give it space, give it presence, give it awareness, is if you have enough presence power, if you have enough inner alignment with inner beingness, when we are completely aligned, whatever arises in this present moment is as it is. The
Right.
grief is as it is. I don't have to bypass the grief. I don't have to say, wipe it off like a whiteboard and say, there's no grief. Yes, I am sad, but like Eckhart says, right? I am sad, but the front is a sadness. In the back, I can feel the joy of being.
Yeah.
I can feel my alignment with my beingness. And yes, I am so sad about my mom passing away,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, I like what you said about how the energy, like what you've been, the audiobook you've been listening to, about how it attracts, because we're going to get what's real and what's true energetically, right? So it doesn't matter what role or what lie we tell ourselves, right? It's the energetically what is coming back to us will reflect the truth of any situation, whether we see it or not. And so it's not just grief, you know, let's not get ahead of ourselves. If we experience anger, jealousy, comparing, competing, let's not avoid that. If we're find ourselves having conflicts with people, we can shift the blame. We can always find a perspective where we're right, right, and creating more. But if we find that this is happening with us, let's gently look at where we're showing up, and what we're avoiding, right, and allow ourselves to be exactly where we're at, because this is the doorway for the next step. And it's just, you can disperse with stagnation on your path. You know, sometimes it feels like you're climbing up, and really the question is there anything I'm avoiding? And see what life shows you. Thank you, Puna.
Perfect. Thank you, Parker. Grateful for it.